Hello, welcome to Music Ally Focus. I'm Music Ally's editor, Joe Sparrow, and this is the first episode of 2025. And appropriately, in this episode, we ask, what is going to happen in music marketing in 2025? And Liam James Ward, CEO and co-founder of Something Something, which is a social and digital music marketing agency, is going to join us to look ahead into this year's coming trends and concepts. And this isn't just a bunch of hand-waving predictions either. Liam is going to dig into some of the shifts he foresees coming in some fundamental concepts. For instance, how the vibe marketing trend of 2024 was perhaps an attempt to get feeling and curatorship back into the core of the fan experience. How truly useful online fan communities are actually about medium-term nurturing instead of trying to leap all the way down the funnel from virality to superfandom. How niche tastemakers are back, and more powerful than ever, and why you should partner with them, and how he senses that the feeling of being genuinely connected to friends and fellow fans on social media might be just around the corner. It's also worth mentioning two other things. First, that this Music Ally Focus episode is made in collaboration with Something Something, and secondly, that Liam was so enthused about what he was saying that he accidentally called somebody on his mobile and left them a voicemail that consisted of the latter half of this podcast. So if you're out there and did receive a random long voicemail from him, please do let me know what you thought. Okay, let's get on with the podcast. All right, very happy to welcome Liam James Ward to the podcast. Hello, Liam.
Hey, Jerry, thanks for having me.
Good to have you here. Now, you are CEO / co-founder of Something Something, but give us a little bit of more context around that, who you are, what you do, and what Something Something does.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I always like to start with making the joke that a name like Something Something, I need to do a lot of explaining. It's not in the net. But yeah, I mean, that's, slightly intentional. We started about just over 3 years ago. We just turned 3. And when we started, we didn't really know what we were going to be. I actually kind of went into the formation of this business being like, I don't want to be a social media agency because it felt as though that model wasn't working anymore. And we accidentally kind of ended up being a version of one anyway, against my will. And so we're kind of a social media agency. We're kind of a content production studio because I think that we really were one of the first businesses anyway in the UK, in the music industry, to kind of get social strategy, channel management and so on with, but then also the very first content production side of things and just put them together. Because at the time it felt very, very separated. And we were kind of one of the first people to go, you know what, these people are running the socials and making the short form vertical video that's going up on it. Why can't this be the same person or at least the same very close knit team?
Well, let me ask you that question straight away. Why? It sort of seems obvious, doesn't it? But why was that not the case?
You'd think so. And you know what? Honestly, so much of what has always made us different is obvious. Like, I've never pretended that we're necessarily smarter or even more talented than anyone else. I think we just actually are listening rather than getting caught up in, why we should do this or why we should do that. It's a little bit more like, well, no, this is the obvious thing. Let's go and do it. And, when we started, I just come out of working at another agency for a few years. I'd previously worked in labels and social media was changing. Again, 3-4 years ago, TikTok had come through, short form video was taking over, and it felt as though it was a bit of a Wild West again. So I got out there with my co-founder, Laura, and we spoke to everyone we knew, artists, labels, managers, people at platforms, people at other agencies even. We were like, what the fuck is going on? Was the headline question, really. And it turned into, what are you not getting? What's pissing you off? And there were 3 key things. Number 1 was, I need actual hands-on help with my content. Because at that point, I think a lot of the time, channel management agencies were doing just that. And, they might help with a bit of videography here and there or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
But they didn't really see it as their job. It was more a bonus. And that meant that, you're paying 2, 3, 4, maybe more grand a month to a company that's sending you a Google sheet with majority of it saying, you need to film this video, you need to find a videographer to shoot this video. So it was through that going, well, why don't we go and do it for them? Why aren't we at least sourcing someone or, ourselves going down to the studio, going down to the show and creating this? Because a large portion of our artists that we work with are actually pretty good at this already. But funnily enough, like sometimes they got a guitar in their hands and they can't do it.
Yeah.
And, probably even bigger majority of the industry aren't so good at that,
Okay. So what I was hoping to do is to sort of take a snapshot of where that social digital music marketing thing, whatever it is now, is right now. But also I'm really interested in talking about where it's going now in 2025, because it does feel like we're at a sort of inflection point, and things are changing for the sort of reasons you've intimated there. So first of all, over the last 3 years, then you mentioned that when you were starting this, TikTok was just sort of new-ish, and we've seen the transformative effects of that over the past 3 years. But what have those key changes been from your perspective, and what do those changes say about the way the audiences connect and where digital social consumption fits in between that?
Yeah, with you, absolutely. I mean, it's worth me maybe even just talking a little bit more about those pain points at the beginning. Point two, though, was we need people who are staying on top of what's trending all the time. I don't need people following trends. I don't need someone opening TikTok's newsletter on a Monday afternoon and just regurgitating that to me. I need people who are there ahead of time. So majority of something are super young. Like that's the easy way to look at it. But more importantly, everyone's really truly in the culture. They're going to the shows and so onwards. And then point three is that, we are a music company, and a good friend of mine, Tom Hoare at PS, who you probably know, like he said something really lovely at the beginning of this year to me. And he was like, when I work with your quote unquote competitors or your peers, the way I prefer to look at it, but when I work with your competitors, I feel like I'm working with tech companies who happen to be in the music space. Whereas with you guys, it feels like I'm working with genuine music people who happen to be occupying this digital social media space. And I really like that because what that says to me is our priority has never been followers, views, likes, algorithms, best parity, so onward. It's always been about telling stories, realistically generating revenue to sustainably build our artists' careers and so onward. So it's worth me just framing that up.
Yeah, yeah.
Really clear where our priorities have always been. But then, where have we seen that change and how has that evolved? In the beginning, it really was a lot of trends. We all knew that. Like when TikTok was new and, I say TikTok, but Reels, YouTube Shorts, so onwards, you had artists who were jumping through hoops of trends and they were growing 1 million followers or whatever it may be. But I'm sure plenty of people on this podcast talk about the fact that that doesn't mean that you can go and sell out or Blue Last even. Is you can have 1 million followers and not even sell 50 tickets in London. And I think we all saw that post-COVID when suddenly it wasn't all just online. We got back into real life and we saw that. So in the beginning, we really were just 3, 4 kids with iPhones running around being trusted by people to just make the TikTok problem go away by spending time with their artists, shooting content, so onwards. But then we eventually, it felt as though a lot of these people were working with either existing agencies or their marketing teams in-house, and we were just being given this little portion of it. But slowly the priority has become that short form video is how people are consuming now. So I think even within our first year, we were put into a position where we were leading the charge a little bit more so. I think that year one really was us proving that we could be trusted with not only bigger artists, but to lead these campaigns, not just follow them from behind and try and come up with silly trends to make shit go viral. Like we could actually define what the marketing campaign was going to be. And then, into year two, for us as a business, it meant sticking around. And I think that for our clients, that meant, making sure that we were actually building outside of just this short form video stuff. I think the big part of that is if you look at the traditional funnel marketing, the very top, you've got your people who are willing to watch a 15-second silly video of you doing some dance or whatever. And then at the bottom, you've got these hardcore people who are making bracelets and queuing up outside your shows hours before law was. And I think the industry's been, trying to get people they've been so focused on the top and they want the bottom. They want people to Evel Knievel over the Grand Canyon from the top to the bottom, and there's nothing going on in the middle. Funnily enough, a video that is maybe a 2-3 minute studio vlog or, God forbid, even longer on YouTube, it's not really going to go viral. That's not a bad thing because it's feeding your audience. It's letting them get deeper.
I'm interested in that. I want to talk more about those changes, but I'm interested in this change you've talked about a couple of times now about sort of chasing virality, chasing numbers, and then this idea of saying, hey, trust me, we're going to aim for this bit in the middle as much as we aim for the viral stuff, because this part is really important to enrich, I guess, the process of fandom, or becoming a fan. That, it feels like maybe a bit of it could sound like a difficult sell. Like, hey, just don't worry about the numbers. For departments that have historically been very, very focused on those KPIs and numbers and show me the growth, and how hard was it to convince people who had who the book stopped with that yeah, okay, numbers are important, but then there's this bigger picture because that feels like a very, very like a complicated transition in some
Yeah, I
ways.
hear you. I mean, it's funny really because we're speaking in past tense here, but I think we're still kind of going through a lot of that jerk beef, I think that it it's interesting, you do work with people who are very much on the cutting edge and are ahead of the curve, and it's great to work with people like that, but it's also great to go through an education process with some people, where I think some labels and managers and artists that we work with are just catching up with where things were 3 years ago. So I do feel sorry for people who don't live and breathe this all day, every day, like me and my team. It can be hard to keep up, which is why we're here to help keep them educated. But that, convincing them, it's just taking a step back. It's like rather than looking at every individual video and every individual's performance, how is we performing? If we look at these almost as pixels or strokes of a paintbrush, let's say, if we take a step back, are we painting the picture we want to do, or are we creating the image we want? If so, then great. Otherwise, if you end up like just looking at one thing all the time, this itty bitty data, you don't kind of look back at the law. I always think like if someone's gonna a good way of looking at this is, if you're going to post a video that realistically it's not going to go viral, but it's going to sell some tickets, someone might discover you through one of those maybe slightly sillier or funner or more engaging videos. But then when they click on your profile and they scroll back, every single video is like that. The relationship is going to be very shallow, and it goes back to that funnel I was talking about. You're literally not even letting people get more into you if you're just showing that shallow thing. It's like when we're going into this and we're developing a posting strategy or we're creating a piece of content, what is the intention for it? Is it to blow up and go viral and get millions of views and millions of eyeballs? Cool, let's go and do that. And if we don't do that, then we should try and understand why that didn't work. But if the intention is we're trying to sell tickets, we're trying to deepen people's relationship, we're trying to push people to sign up to a mailing list or whatever it may be. Obviously, if you can do both, great.
Sure.
Realistically, if you're really trying to funnel in on this one objective, did it do that? Yes. Okay, cool. Then the intention was met. So it's a successful post, in my opinion.
So it's sort of a shift of thinking, sort of from short-termism to medium to long-termism.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think, that's why I was kind of mirroring it by looking back at our own journey. I think we were very zoomed in on creating these big viral moments in the beginning. And then, we took a step back and we were like, no, we're building artists here. We're not just building silly little videos. And it was a really interesting education process, even internally for us to kind of be like, we can't just get a viral video and then pat ourselves on the back and be like, great, we did our job. And I think a lot of other people in this space are still doing that. For us, it's like, no, okay, did that actually generate any streams? Did it turn over into any kind of mailing list signups where we've captured first party data where we can get people a bit more? So onwards, like those are the things that I see as a metric for success, way more than views and so onwards. Don't get me wrong. I'll happily take a viral video every day. We'll do that any day. But, that's just the tip of the iceberg before you get into the rest of it.
What does that say then about audience needs and behavior now? Because it's been tempting in some ways to look at how, particularly around, I'm using air quotes, virality and viral video,
Yeah.
to sort of, but this also extends into how super fans can be viewed, which is, our aim is to go big and engage them and get as much from them as possible. But it does seem that fans are getting not wise to that, but it's not actually what they want. They want something richer as well. How does that, and that's just my rough feeling, but how does that sort of play into what you're seeing by doing this?
No, you're right. And I think a big part of that is the individualism of all of it, right? I mean, we can sit here and read incredible music ally like blogs about superfan or this or that or this new marketing technique. We can do that, but it doesn't mean that you can just go and copy and paste that to every artist you work on. And again, it's one of those things, isn't it, Joe? Like it feels obvious to say it, but apparently it isn't because some people are still getting it so wrong. Like, yeah, the super fan approach and really squeezing as much into that relationship as you can with that person, making them feel super seen and super served. That does work for certain audiences and certain artists, but I'm always much more about looking at a North Star of what we want to achieve, putting out into the world, seeing how it's received and reacting to that rather than sitting here and putting 6 months of planning in place and then isn't responding the way we thought it was and it's derailed. Something we do as a business is we only take on stuff that we really truly believe in. We're not working with hundreds of artists. I think we work with about somewhere 35, 40 maybe artists at the moment. And that means that we're really able to focus in on each of them. Each one of the social media leads, project leads in my team, they only work on 3 or 4 artists at a time. So I would say to them, think like a manager, they're able to focus in a bit more.
you've sort of picked up on something there that was the next thing I was going to ask you about, which is that there's a level of trust, and I don't mean trust between, let's say, a label and you as a company, but I mean more in the sense of trusting the understanding of what that individual artist's individual audience needs are, and really going for that, because that we're in, we're in a market now which is completely globalized, so the temptation is just to smooth everything out and try and hit everybody, and your approach is sort of the opposite of that.
Yeah, I mean, you're going both for long-termism there, which we've already touched on. You've got to have that trust, and that's scary, and I'll never pretend to an artist or an artist team that it's not scary to go, this might not work for 3 months plus, maybe more. But then when it connects, all this work we've done for the past 3 months or so is worth it because people aren't, going viral on their first video, let's say, and then
Yeah.
nothing else for those fans to get into. So they're just going on to the next thing. They're not, if you give them a bit more to dig into, it's important, to develop the lore, I guess, is a way of looking at it. But the other thing you're looking at there is like, yeah, this the very, very classic marketing thing. If you're talking to everybody, you're talking to nobody, right? You've got to be doing things that feel like the person you're hitting is feeling super seen. It's why, slight shoehorn, slight sharp left turn, but I've spoken about the content side of our business and the
Yeah.
social media management side of our business. But the fan account management and working with fan accounts has been a really big part of our business this year. And I know it's become a really big buzzword over the past year or so, but we've been working on this for a little while. And, it's been really exciting to see how that space in and of itself has developed so much. But what that allows is rather than just, going and working on the artist's socials and that being the big beacon, and it's really like your headline statements, putting down in the stand, this is what we're putting out into the world. You've then got either localized, whether it's, literally by region, territory, different fan pages, whether it's operating in different niches, whether it's a little bit more focused on film edits, or it's like what the artist is wearing and you're able to tap into more fashion audiences or so onwards. These kind of like what I refer to as auxiliary accounts that allow you to tap into whole different niches within the audience. We're zooming out to the point where we're even going off of that one artist profile. It's like, what's the entire ecosystem of different pages, whether they're fan ran, and we're constantly enabling genuine fans to have access to content and access to obviously slightly blurrier timelines to allow them to kind of have their own strategies, but also we're running fan accounts and so onwards, so that it's an entire infrastructure of different profiles, genuine fans and so onwards plugging into each other. So that zoomed out view has gone even further now. We're not even just looking at the brush strokes of one painting, we're looking at a whole gallery exhibition.
Just as a sort of ancillary question there, one thing I'm always trying to keep in mind when doing these podcasts is for people who are DIY. So you've got either very, very small labels or truly independent DIY artists. Of course, we're in an era now where you can do that and have great success, and that's amazing. But I can imagine them listening to what you just said there and thinking, "Well, how do I fit that into my very squeezed time?" Is this an approach that you can scale all the way down as well?
The thing I'd say to any artist who's a little bit earlier in their career is really making the most of the people around them early doors. And what I mean by that is the fan. We've ticked a couple of boxes already here with a few different buzzwords, but it's like, the super fans, if that's what, you're reading these big, massive articles about how to break an artist and how the biggest artists in the world did what they did, and you've got these multi-million-pound major labels doing this, you can still adopt and learn from that approach, even at a smaller scale. You can still do all that on a small scale. The handful of 3-4 people who are turning up to your shows, can you make them feel really included? And can you reward them by, inviting them in, going for drinks with them, giving them something that is super, super exclusive and, genuinely adds value to their life? Whether it's, hey, we're going to do some production lessons with some of my like top fans or someone with genuinely bringing value, not like inferred value. And then in exchange, what are you asking for that? Is it that they run your Discord, run your fan account, so onwards? It's really hard to give a really blanket answer because,
Of course, yeah.
sure, there are the rappers in West Africa who might listen to it, the DJ producers in Berlin who might listen to this, so onwards, this acoustic pop artist living in Dalston who might listen to this. Can't give one answer to all of it, but the big thing for me is like taking the learnings from from these things, and trying to go, what is the version of it for me? Does it fit? And also, if the answer is no, then the answer is no. Great, don't try and force it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, are there any other sort of fundamental shifts that you've seen that are sort of going to give us an idea of where things are going?
I've kind of said long form in passing. I think that long form slash more polished produced content coming back, quote unquote, I'm using air quotes now as well,
Yeah.
as though it went away somewhere. But I think that now people have got kind of sick of the, not sick, but they've got very used to raw iPhone short form content all the time, being hit over the head with it. I think it's always going to be a matter of culture versus culture, counterculture, and the pendulum swinging back and forth. And therefore, people have got so used to that, the people actually cutting through with incredible music video visuals or longer form pieces where you can actually get to know them on a deeper level, that is something different. And therefore, there are probably kids in the playground who are, secondary school playground, who are going, I mean, oh, have you seen this artist? It's sick. They're like doing YouTube vlogs because they've never heard of that. It's just been doing that before. Or like, oh, maybe I'll check out this sick video. And it's like a genuinely like incredible, not necessarily big budget, but like, great produced creative idea. I think that sort of thinking needs to come back. And I think especially for another buzzword for you, but world building perspective of actually being able to see the world that the artist is in, I think is really important. And yeah, allowing people to be stars again, I guess, is what I'm saying in that. Because something I had to almost educate myself on a little bit is in the beginning when I was like, no, iPhone, raw, everything, this is all we need to be doing now. I was like, okay, great, but you need to show artists in more of a stardom light at some point to show them step up, to show them kind of be accepted into the mainstream or so onwards, to then make the artists the fans who come on that journey proud and see that and get that inertia and so onward.
You said a few minutes ago that you're still dealing with people who perhaps are understandably working in very slow moving businesses. Global businesses sometimes move very slowly, and that's the nature of it. But what are the sort of misconceptions or missteps that you're still seeing happen, and they're sort of out of step with reality in terms of consumption and audience needs?
Yeah, I think that it's that lack of intention. It's the following, even us having this conversation, someone might be listening to this and making notes and going, cool, I'm going to go and do all these things. And then when they don't work, they might tweet Music Ally or they might tweet me or X me or whatever it is and be like, oh, I did everything you said and it hasn't worked for me.
Yeah.
But it's like, because your intention there is to try and copy a blueprint and to kind of try and just not really think about things on a deeper level and just go and do what, or go and read some article about how Dua Lipa's team broke this new record and cool, I'm going to go and do that. Or some shiny new upcoming artist has done this thing and they really focused on their close friends on Instagram story. And it's like, cool, well, I'm going to go and do that. And I think you can see sometimes those artists or artist teams who do just kind of follow what the latest thing is. And the very simple thing is, we're going to get a lot of Charlie XCX copycats coming through. You can't just go and look at who the biggest artist in the world is and copy them and think that it's going to work for you. It's really taking the time to think, what is the story I'm trying to tell? Again, that's something that we've always thought is, rather than letting trends, algorithms, best practices tell you who you are, you need to figure out who you are and then figure out how you use those tools to build that, and I think a lot of people are still getting that backwards. It's probably how I'd get a little bit more to the point on that question.
One thing I've heard a few times from you and from other people working in a similar space is that we're at a sort of breakaway point now in terms of what digital social marketing is, for not because there's necessarily been a specific technological change, but because audiences think differently. Platforms are working differently. There's so many platforms and routes to consumption and routes to audience and places that audiences can live. So this is what I'm really interested in, is what are these shifts that you think are coming in this year and why? And how can you deal with them?
Yeah, I mean, the two words that come to mind for me when I think about 2024 are, I think brain rot was even the word of free something, but also, what they call like vibes marketing, where rather than trying to get individual ads, let's say, I'm thinking more from a brand or a fashion perspective here, rather than trying to get one ad that goes really far, it's like a general vibe that's bringing people in. I mean, I think it was something like, was it the Olympics or was it Wimbledon that posted something like 2,000 pieces of content over the 2 weeks of the tournament. I can't remember which one it was, but it was one of those
Yeah.
sporting events. And it was like going back to that pixel comparison, they're going very high definition by getting as many pixels out as they possibly can because they've got a very clear idea of the overall picture they're trying to paint. So taking that into 2025, I think that continuing to bleed out into as many places as you can. I mean, we're having conversations with PR agencies right now, trying to understand that relationship between social media and PR. I've already said to you, we we've we've got one view of the artist's social media channel, but then we're already looking at auxiliary social media channels. But now we've got to go even further and go, okay, cool. Well, how are you telling the story through other people's social media channels? It's obviously not a new thing to have influencers, let's say, going to shows and posting about you and getting out through that avenue. But in this world of, again, brain rot and just so much incoming content all the time, people want tastemakers again, right?
Hmm.
I think there's this big conversation right now about these sorts of social media brands as that social media brands as a way of kind of inflecting it. But I mean that as in, whether that's recess therapy, whether that's, the big obvious things of hot ones, chicken shop dates, so onwards. People want to be told who's cool, who should I be checking out, what should I be listening to. People want these kind of slightly putting their head above the noise tastemakers again, who can tell you, you should check this out, you should check that out, because, this kind of algorithm led stuff and this, AI led stuff and playlisting and so onwards, where it's just so much incoming content all the time. People want a little bit more direction again. So what I'm getting at within that is, I do think, I'm trying to think of how this can relate to artists, but a big thing for us is, we're trying to partner with those tastemakers. We're trying to figure out, how do we tell stories, not through just the art of socials, not just through these auxiliary fan accounts and HQ accounts and everything that I've already been talking about, but additionally, how are we reaching out to other people and bringing them in? And I think we're going to see a lot more of that. So I guess my big piece of advice in December 24 heading into 25 is identify those tastemakers in the niches now, because I think that they're going to have a massive level of growth and so onwards.
It's kind of interesting, isn't it, in itself? Because in a very sort of broad way, what we've seen is the shift from perhaps from the beginning to the sort of first part of the internet era. We saw the shift away from tastemakers, from traditional things like magazines, DJs, radio station, TV station, that kind of thing. It was completely disintermediated, and then we had, everybody was a blogger. When I was a music blogger, it was, everyone was a blogger, and then we've become even more atomized, so that actually everyone is an individual node around the world, and we all get everything served to us algorithmically. And yet it's clear at the same time, societally, people are desperately seeking guidance and community and alignment with all those things. So, you mentioned before how the pendulum sort of swings a bit, but it feels like it's not going to swing all the way back to those sort of monolithic tastemakers. Is what we're talking about then perhaps like very, very narrow but deep niche tastemakers, and people are sort of falling into these slots?
Yeah, I think that's it. I think you've nailed it. I think that it's the same. If we look at tastemakers almost as in the way that we've all spoken about artists for the past couple of years, you don't have as many Elton John, David Bowie, Michael Jacksons as you used to, where there's these, because, there's people have access to so many niches now. Isn't just so much real estate on a radio station or within a magazine covers and so onwards. There's so much more real estate to fill. So you've got more people, more artists than ever being accessed, which means people can find their perfect artist a lot more. I think it's the same thing we could say with tastemakers. I think that we probably, as you say, won't get as many massive people who are the be all and end all, the God's word of what is the right thing to be listening to or not. But yeah, exactly. Those people who are maybe into like super underground Berlin techno infused by East African certain genres and so onwards. I think that if you're really into that very hyper niche, there will totally be a tastemaker for you. And anyone and everyone who's Venn diagrammed by that will be into it. and I think that that's why it's going to make sense sooner rather than later for you to go and find those people and even help develop those people and take a chance on them.
Yeah, and if you are out there making hybrid East African Berlin techno, please email me. You mentioned a few minutes ago that sort of vibe, the vibes-based economy of less looking for sort of individual things, but they're building up a picture over time.
Yeah.
Again, that's an indicator of this shift towards the medium term, both on consumption and production side of content and experiences. Do you think that's going to continue as well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's it. I think, to be the guy who looks at the biggest artist of the year, I think that's what Charlie did, right? Like I'd be really interested, and someone should, maybe it can be music highlights. Someone should go and do a massive survey at some point about what depth level people had with that record. How many people who said Brat Summer actually want to listen to the full thing? You know what I mean? I'd be interested to know how many people actually came back to that body of work. There was an entire vibe there that encapsulated not just a generation. I mean, even all the way up to Kamala Harris and so onwards, like really captured like an entire year, an entire moment. And I think that, yes, okay, I am talking about the biggest thing of the year there, but letting that trickle down, if we go and look at even Fontaine's DC at a slightly split level, there are people who, and there are so many other bands and artists who, when they are playing a show in, say, London, I mean, even all the way down to the Dare, yes, that's technically probably part of the Charlie stuff, I guess, but I went to go and see the Dare play at Kentish Town Forum, and I was with a friend of mine who's in his 50s, and he was saying this is the first time in so long where I've seen people dress like the artist. And that's a vibe that you're stepping into. It goes back to there's a subculture and so onwards. It's kind of what I think these artists are building around them in a really interesting way. People striving for that world to step into and to let that world bleed back into your own real life, i.e. how you dress, the posters on your wall and so onward. I think absolutely we're going to see more and more of that. And people, I guess vibes marketing, again, quote unquote, is basically just trying to hijack or tap into or direct that a little bit more.
One comparison I always make is that you're in the 80s, for instance, when you were getting these very sort of very hyper-localized scenes in the UK of like, let's say goth or specific types of metal or even acid house, things like that. They were growing in a very small geographic region, and they were sort of hot housing and mutating, and people were becoming, they were dressed like that because that's what they had, and then it exploded out. And it's sort of that, isn't it? Which, and over the last maybe even 2 decades, that's been really smoothed out. That thing you mentioned of seeing people dressing like the artist is, you haven't seen that on a very wide scale for a while now.
The fundamentals of marketing never really change. And that sort of thing that you're describing, it's so interesting. And somebody described it to me as, well, I'm going to make these numbers up, but when a record was £20, let's say, and you've only got £20 to spend at the record store that day, you can't go and just whack into Spotify, I'm going to go and listen to related artists and so onward. So when you go and buy the Cure record and you're like, oh, I really like this, and then you go back to the record store again and you're like, okay, I've only got another £20 to spend. I'm probably going to buy another Cure record because, I know I like those guys, but what are the other things in that aisle that are relevant? Or I'm going to go over to the original tastemaker. I'm going to go to the person working in the record store and ask, yeah, I really liked this. What else should I check out? And they're going to recommend to you. And I think that sort of thing is that user behavior, I guess, is what we're trying to get back to, I think, where we've been so lost in it, where there's so many record store workers who are generated by AI screaming at you about a million different things that everyone's like, I just need to want to tell me what I'm going to like again,
Yeah. With that in mind then, what about, are there any platforms that you, or technologies that you see playing like an important role in this shift?
That's a really good question, because I think we're in a weird period right now where everyone's waiting for the next one. I think that I feel right now the same way about social media as I did just before I started something with Laura, because it feels as though we're slightly getting to the end of this chapter of where things are at, and everyone's waiting to break through into that next one. I think, we talk about community a lot. There's obviously some great platforms out there with OpenStage and Laylo, and, even the slightly more connected ones of Discord and Geneva and so onwards. I think that those things have been whispered about very loudly for a while. I still think that that's going to continue to be a focus in 25. But in terms of this, and also mailing lists and so on was in general, I think that very direct to fan thing is really, I think that those technologies will continue to work. But I think one thing that maybe everyone who's getting very caught up on that is getting a little bit wrong is that it's all well and good to nurture those super fans, but how are you finding them in the first place? And I think a lot of those people don't really have that answer yet. So I think that I'm constantly trying to work out new partnerships with people who work in that space to figure out how can we have a real full stack, full funnel approach here for our artists. If we're very good at getting people, getting eyeballs, getting in front of eyeballs and bringing them into that funnel, bringing them a certain level down, once they're at the bottom, we've done a decent job of that so far, but how are we partnering with these other companies to ensure that they're super served now? But, I'm going to slightly shoehorn something in here because I was thinking about it when we were just talking about that record store analogy. But the thing I'll always think about when it comes to new technologies, when radio was invented, the record industry essentially lobbied and spent a lot of time, effort, and money lobbying against it. They're scared that, if someone can buy a radio once, then they've got unlimited music. They're going to stop buying records, or they're going to stop buying singles at that point as they were. And then a handful of labels got really all the way in, and they were like, well, if we can market our singles using this radio thing, and then we're using that or we're making deals, I guess it would have been pay-only about them, but making deals with these radio presenters to then plug the album, we're using that as a medium to then market. So whenever there's something new, whether it's when TikTok was new and it was a bit scary, and now AI is new and it's a bit scary, and all these things, whenever there's something new that comes into my life, I'm always like, do you want to be the guy who tried to illegalize radio, or do you want to be the person who jumped on board and got straight in there? Jumping straight on board with every single new fad is not only exhausting, but it's probably going to get you in a lot of trouble at some point. But, I'm always very open to trying new things out. And I think that ideology is probably what's worked for me. So I think I would always implore anybody, whether they're an industry professional or an artist themselves, to be open-minded to new things, even if it's scary because it's new. Just go and try it out, and you might even break the mold and be the person who defines what is the done thing on that new platform.
One thing I was thinking of is I spoke to someone recently, and they were sort of saying that there is I'm not sure if this is completely true or not, but they were sort of saying there's platform fatigue. Like there's only so many platforms that any one person can sort of devote their time to, and you can sort of see that people choose this platform over this one. Some people are more Twitter or X or Blue Sky or whatever, and some people are more Instagram or TikTok or whatever. But one thing that got me thinking is perhaps there isn't really a lot of room for another. I don't know how many people can juggle, but let's say it's 3. Is there room for a 4th that is a sort of community-based platform, or are we perhaps going to see existing platforms really doubling down into community-oriented features?
Really, I mean, I think we're already seeing a lot of that. I think Instagram bringing in broadcast, I think it was at the top of this year, or maybe it was into last year. Now I've lost all track of time. But, broadcast coming in is obviously a big focus for that. WhatsApp, which is obviously another Meta product technically, that's obviously really doubled down on literally communities and so onwards as features. I know it was Adam Mazzari, who's the head of Instagram, doing a podcast that really opened me up to this, where I listened to him talking about how, I can't remember the exact number, but it was something crazy, like 90% of media exchange on Instagram is done via DM. It's not done via feed posts. It's not done via stories. It's not even done by close friends or whatever. People are posting less and less on main. They're posting even less on posting more on stories compared to feed, but less on stories in general comparatively.
Yeah.
And they're just DMing straight to their mates, or what we're getting back to almost is, you said earlier on, and I kind of just went, yes, of course, where the user is also the kind of contributor as well at the same time, where I think that boundary is slightly breaking again as well, where, when you look at real like Gen Z or maybe even borderline Gen Alpha at this point, most of them have 100, 200 followers. They have private accounts. They're just talking to their friends on there, but they are consuming from like people who actually want to be content creators, and they're sharing those posts via DMs to each other, or they're sending each other Snapchats or Snapchat-like media exchange on Instagram DM and so onwards. I think we're getting into that way. And I think that it's a lot harder to gauge that, but I think that if we can get into a position where, rather than my vocabulary almost took me to going, we can hack into that a bit more. sounds really insidious. But if we can think of ways to genuinely create value for fans in that, then they're going to be the ones who are spreading it. And I think that's it. With our reporting at the moment, one of the biggest things I'll look at is, rather than views, it's the shareability, it's the share rate of those people who viewed it. How many of them shared it? Because
So I was going to say that sort of takes us back to, again, we're being nice and circular in this conversation, in that idea of shifting people away from metrics and KPIs, because, it's, in some ways it's hard to, if we can assume a lot of sharing of very hyper viral content is happening on WhatsApp or messaging platforms, and we just can't measure it. Like, you can maybe measure the end interactivity if people click through, but ultimately, if it's a GIF or it's an image, it's sort of, that information is private and out there, and but just because you can't measure the impact doesn't mean it's not happening, and that is a big shift in thinking, isn't it?
yeah, yeah. I mean, even Instagram a couple months ago, they started including the amount of shares on the post alongside the like number, alongside the comment number. They've got the amount of times it's been shared now, because TikTok has had that since the beginning, or from very near the start at least. So maybe not the beginning, but you could see how many times it's been shared, and via our internal systems that allow us to report, we will literally look at that share rate of those people who viewed, because views is just such a passive thing. You can have, I've seen this enough times. You can have 100,000 views and no comments and almost fuck all likes. And likes isn't barely even worth anything nowadays, because it's like such a passive medium. Comments is worth a little bit more because someone's gone to the effort to do it. But if you've just got a bunch of people dropping fire emojis, it's probably just bait comment hackers who are trying to grow their own audiences. It's probably not worth anything. So I think sentiment is always going to be the number one thing. But in the middle there, shareability. How many people are actually seeing that piece of content going, wow, that really speaks to me. I'm going to go to the effort of sending that to 1, 3, 5, 10, 50 other people who I think will also like.
And that's a very lightweight form of people becoming creators, isn't it? Or maybe a better way of looking at it is becoming micro tastemakers. They have a group of friends, and you see something, you think, okay, this will make this group of friends on WhatsApp or Snapchat laugh. I'm going to put this here, and it's that sort of very nuanced understanding of value and contribution, isn't it? That is happening all the way down to the sort of end user level. Whereas before we had these, you had users who were 99.9%, and then the small number of creators, and now that's very blurred, isn't it? And I guess if you can get the grips of that, you can really make things work. Let me pin you down to one final thing then, which is, if looking ahead to 2025, if you could sort of wave a magic wand and make one thing happen that you think would be really beneficial, maybe something that you think would be really great in terms of making what you do work better in some way, what would that be?
I have said this for a long time. I want to feel more connected on social media again. And I think everyone begins to win in that way. And maybe this is just me at the ripe old age of 28 starting to turn into being old man waves at cloud sort of thing. But I remember when I first moved to London, you could go on Facebook and you'd go on your Facebook event calendar, look at what shows were happening in London at that point, and you could see who was going, and you'd watch them, and you'd say, oh, look, are you heading to this? And if they put going, they almost definitely are. If they put maybe, they might not be. So onwards. So if someone actually put going, they probably were. You could figure out meeting up, you go for beers and you go to the show. And I think that connectivity is really valuable. And I think that probably happens now where people are in group chats, and which is definitely how I do it. Some way of connecting with my friends a little bit more to cut through the noise, actually get what I want from my friends again. And I think that is kind of a version of Instagram close friends and so onwards, but without you actually having to put content out. You kind of are engaging with things in that way, and it bleeds into real life, I guess, is what I'm talking about. That's where I think social media kind of needs to head in the future. And if I could wave a magic wand, I would make that happen, because I think everyone would be happier. I think artists get to be more authentic because they're genuinely connecting with people rather than trying to cut through a lot of what, this word slop keeps coming up now.
Yeah.
Trying to cut through the slop. You're able to genuinely connect with people. The fans would be happier because, again, if they actually genuinely want to subscribe, follow, whatever it may be, to an artist's content, they're actually receiving it and connecting with them in that way. And, me as somebody who works in social media agency, content production studio, whatever the hell we are, it's better for us because we're not having to sit here and talk about, the word hacking would never be in my vocabulary because it's just pure, authentic output. And I think that that's where we used to be a little while ago. And I think if we can find a way to have access to the amount of niches and so on that we do, but without it being sloppy and messy and noisy, and actually still be able to cut through that and get to the things we want. But, I guess the note I'll end on, to slightly sound like I'm trying to appease my good friends at the platforms, I know that's their mission too. They don't want this slop. They don't want all this noise and so onwards. They want people to be connected. So I guess the point is we're all on the same mission here, and hopefully in 25 we can begin to reach that.
That sounds like a better world, doesn't it? I think we could do with a little bit of that at the moment. One actual final question before you go, Liam, which we've talked a lot about marketing and music. Let's talk about music. If you could only pick one record to listen to forever, what would it be?
Oh, geez, forever. Because you need to, there's so many ways you can approach that question, right?
Yes.
A versatility in there and so onward.
This is where jazz gets picked quite a lot.
You know what? I wouldn't go that way. I'd go the complete opposite. I'd want something quite extreme, because if I wanted to chill out or to background, I'd just turn the record off for a little bit and have a bit of silence and listen to the actual, if this is Desert Island Disc, listen to the actual sea that's crashing up on the waves. So what would I listen to forever? You know what? I just got back from a little stint in LA, and I got really into classic rock again because I felt like driving through the Hollywood Hills and so on.
Yeah,
really felt like I was connecting to something, and I was newfoundly obsessed with Appetite for Destruction by Guns N' Roses.
Okay.
Bounds of problematicism in the lyrics and so on, which I had to slightly swallow a pill over. That record meant a lot to me as a kid. I seem to be connecting to it in a whole new way again, in a really fun way. And that's a record that whenever I want to get pumped up, that does its job. So that's
okay. Good. I'll put a link to that below the podcast. But yes, that is the other common choice. Actually, either people look for the value for money and try and get an album which is, let's say, like a classic jazz album which takes you on a journey every time you listen to it, or it's going for the album that just hits that sort of bypasses thought and just hits that sort of pure pleasure node. And, is just something that has a very specific point in your life, and that's a good thing to reconnect with. So I think that's a good, solid choice.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Thank you. And just one final note from me is that I just checked, and the person I accidentally called is someone I'm pretty sure I met at a house party in Huddersfield in something like 2014. So if you end up listening to this, I'm sorry for leaving half of the podcast on your voicemail.
If you're working in marketing, enjoy the free insight. Okay. Liam, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you again to Liam for joining us. There are links to everything he mentioned, including something beneath the podcast, so please do go and check them out. If you thought that was useful, please do share it on with somebody else who you think will get something out of it. And if you'd like to get in touch with me, I would of course love to hear from you. You can email me on joe@musically.com. We also have a free weekly email called The Knowledge, which rounds up bits and pieces from across all of Music Ally's broad range of services. So sign up and impress your friends. Links also in the description as ever. So that's it. Thanks for joining us. I've been Joe Sparrow. You've been you. And until next time, farewell.